Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another movie review podcast on Three Marlets channel. And before I get started, spoiler warning: Osama bin Laden dies in the end. Of course, this week I'm looking at Zero Dark 30, the controversial, and we'll get into that in a second, film of the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And first off, I'll say I like this movie. It was very well done, very suspenseful at the end there, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. However, and I will say this, it can be hard to follow if you're not familiar with the material. And I'm talking about just that there's a terrorist group called Al Qaeda, and they did something called 9/11. You kind of had to really been following and paying attention and remembering stuff from the past 7 years when it comes to terrorism, which I have, which made it very easy to follow, and which in some ways is kind of spoils parts of the movie. Like, there's a scene where there's a bombing. The CIA agents get caught. They think they're getting an asset in there, and they let the asset in, and they get bombed. And I was and their supposed asset is a terrorist, and kills everyone. Detonates a bomb. And as soon as they started setting up the scenario, I'm like, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. He's gonna detonate a bomb. So there was a little bit of that suspension, or that surprise. I think they were going for a little bit of a surprise there. Is ruined, but at the same time, there was a little bit of tension, at least, knowing that was coming. You're going, okay, how are they playing this out? But I'm going to get into that particular scene in a little bit, because it actually has some more deeper meaning as well. Which we could say a lot about this. But yeah, there is a lot of that type of stuff where if you remember things, and if you've been keeping track of matters of terrorism, it's a lot easier to follow this movie, because they're very quick. They throw out a lot of names, and they also have a lot of authentic DC language. It's the easiest way of putting it. DC uses a lot of shorthand, and for those of you that haven't seen some of my previous videos, I even did reviews while I was down there. Actually, I interned while I was in grad school at a DoD think tank in 2010, so right around the time this stuff was going on. And so that experience, because I was in there with former generals, colonels, former U.S. ambassadors, and it was in the middle, all specializing in the Middle East, I personally was familiar with a lot of the language they were using, a lot of the Washington shorthand, or the D.C. shorthand, you might call it. So it was easy for me to follow this stuff, and it at least gives that aura of authenticity. And some of the details they added there, it seemed natural. This seems like the way some of the people talk down there, including somewhat like the way they use cursing in this, because they use it to make a point. But believe me, because in DC people curse, but they don't curse a lot. Unless you're one former U.S. ambassador, who will remain nameless, who was down the hall from me in this think tank, who every time his computer went off, we heard for like 5 minutes straight he would just curse at the damn thing. That was always fun. So even some of that language, they kind of balanced it out. Because as soon as they kind of had her be like the one that says, like, she'll say fuck around her superiors, I'm like, I've known and worked with people in this, like, at that level. Yeah, including one that's a former ambassador to Saudi Arabia. There's no looking like using the F word around a high-ranking person is not going to get you eyebrowed. Believe me. Oh, believe me. I mean, it's contextual, it's complicated, but there was a lot of levels of that. But if you're not familiar, you have been keeping close track on this, and I could easily see somebody getting lost in like what's going on. This is a high context movie. You need to know the background, I think, before you can really get to watch the movie and get the context and they start talking about people, and if you know who Amal Zawahiri is, and these individuals, then just them by mentioning a name, you get the context of where other people in the movie fit in. So if there's some criticism that people are saying that, oh, I don't understand what's going on for half this movie until they get to the raid, I could see that being a problem. Me, because of my own background, because of my own academic studies, and my own internship experiences, am very familiar with this world. or at least, the content, what people do in that. So, with that out of the way, it's time to get to the other big new controversy over this film. Is people are questioning about, does this film advocate torture? And I think at the very least it raises an important question. It raises the question of torture, but here's the problem with that. You can't ignore the torture, because however you want to spin it, information obtained from torturing individuals was key to eventually unraveling where Osama bin Laden was. To ignore it, I think, would be to insult what was going on, how all this stuff rolled into each other. You can't, unfortunately, get around it. If you're gonna make a movie about the manhunt for Osama bin Laden, you've got to do the torture part. And if you don't like torture, there's tons and tons of valid arguments. But in this case, it got its end result. So yeah, this isn't a good example for you. This is kind of like arguing with those examples where there is a shooter and a civilian happened to have a gun and brought the person down. In that particular instance, you can't argue against that person having a gun. You can't ignore that part, even though you can very, very validly, and actually with statistical backing, back that overall gun ownership probably contributes more gun crime. You could make that argument still. And you can make arguments against torture, why there's problems with torture. However, if you're looking at what this movie is not about torture, but it's about the hunt for Osama bin Laden. In this particular instance, it helped out. So if it wants to be an accurate history, that's what they're at least trying from what we hear, you gotta include that. You gotta show that it worked in this case, because the genesis of this info did kind of come from black sites hidden somewhere in the globe. Speaking of our people talking about this film definitely has that aura of authenticity. It feels real, and I think for a lot of people, they're going to take this as being completely real. Like this is almost like a recreation, which it's obviously not, but it's hard to tell what they might have made up, what's not actually real, because it's in this tricky situation or period where there's a lot of people that want to talk about this, but they're right in that a lot of the people kind of involved with the the hunt and stuff have kind of started to retire, especially after after they bag Osama. It's a common when there's some sort of big event like that for a lot of people to decide to capstone their career with that and kind of go into retirement or semi-retirement, especially if you're in the DC area. Which is why we probably haven't seen a whole lot of the whole story revealed and a lot of names dropped, is because people are still being a little tight-lipped. They want to be more, I want to tell you what happened, but I don't want to mention exactly, because even though they might have retired, and well, there's really effectively nothing the CIA can do or intelligence can do with someone. They're not going to, in reality, they're not going to pull pensions, and most people know that. If they go talk, okay, this is kind of how it really went down, and just don't say it was me, they're really not going to pull pensions on that. So they kind of know but they know that there's still a lot of friends, and a lot of these guys still want to work in places where I did my internship, the think tank circuit. They'll do that for another 10 years before they go to full retirement. So because they still have associates that are, a lot of people stay in, of course, the intelligence field or wherever else in the military, but a lot of people kind of retired after they capstone their career with the Osama bin Laden thing, and are now kind of more willing to talk about stuff that was going on. So I have no doubt that there is a lot of accurate information in here. But I'm sure that because we don't know the full story, kind of, there's still a lot of it that's in the dark, and it will probably remain in the dark for another 15, 20 years before we really get a full story, before people are really willing to open up all about it. And now that they kind of know all their old associates are retired, or in positions of senior enough positions where they're not going to get screwed over as much, they're going to talk more. They're going to start naming more names, more dates, more exact info, and more willing to say who they are, more willing to attribute it. Right now you're into this, how should I put it? Because, what I said before, with a lot of people being in their semi-retirement, working at think tanks, most think tanks run under what's called a Chatham House rule. And where I worked at the National Defense University has the same thing. And what that means is you can tell people all sorts of stuff. You just never attribute it to an individual. And that's kind of the wink, wink, nod, nod, which is why you never hear me name names. You never hear me name names when I talk about that old internship. We can tell you about stuff, but you never say who it is. It offers a lot of free flow of information, so it's very easy to get in, especially if they have researchers or anyone contributing to this who is in that circuit, who can get access to these type of seminars, meetings, and such. It's very easy to acquire this information. I don't talk about some of the stuff I've overheard over when I was in there for 3 months, but some of the stuff I overheard is in casual conversation, be like, wow, there's people that have no idea about the conversations that are going on in some of these things, and not in a bad way. A lot of good stuff, actually. But individuals from governments who supposedly hate each other, kind of having nice, casual conversations and such. It's great when you can have that type of atmosphere, and you can really expand the overall knowledge of people that are in the field. So I kind of get how they could have acquired a lot of this info, just because I've been in, not involved, but I'm like, being an intern, you get to this kind of sit in the back room, because I had a really sweet internship. Where I worked, we had two intern departments. There was the interns that did all the shit jobs, and then there were the two me and myself and another, who worked for our boss, who we got the really nice stuff. Like, our boss would bring us into the meetings and stuff, and this it's like your job is to schmooze and talk to them. I want to get them talking about stuff. We want them to start chatting, so they'll go start chatting with other people. And that was our job, so that was awesome. Great, I got to talk about Mexican soap operas with Moroccans and Egyptians. Yeah, apparently they're popular over there. Or at least they were popular a couple of years ago. But I digress. Time to get into the actual movie, which no point in really recapping it. We'll talk about with particular scenes. Overall, the tone very much just sticking with a realistic. I think Catherine Bigelow here really tried to stay neutral, and I think the way she played it, again, there was a lot of criticism of this film. I think she went the Patton route, and what I mean by the Patton route is that the film Patton is both called the greatest war film of all time and the greatest anti-war film of all time. Because I think it went for more just kind of showing the nature and showing the complicated nature of warfare. It's both good and bad. Bad stuff happens and good stuff happens with it. It's difficult, and it's one of those films that when it comes to violence and warfare, kind of does throw up its hands and says, listen, this is how it is. It's not one or the other. It gets really, really muddy and messy. This film does not pull any punches. When it shows the torture, it shows authentic torture. And what I mean by that is there's not that Hollywood torture where it's because we have a 5 minute scene, we have this, they have, some sort of really crazy torture where they're gonna, I'm gonna, cut off the guy's hands and he'll talk. In reality, a lot of people can resist that. Real torture is psychological and sustained. Real torture is, we're gonna do this for days at a time, and it's not gonna be as necessarily crazy. It could be as much as making you somebody stand, hung up, put into a little box, and of course, the water. God damn it, the term is forgetting me. And people have been talking about it so much. Waterboarding, yeah, the waterboarding torture, which is, it doesn't seem like visually, it doesn't seem like it because the way they do it, you put a rag over their head so they can't not close their mouths, and it forces the water down their throat and just simulates drowning. I'm sure there's a lot of people that will look at that and go, "Oh, come on, I've seen worse." That when you do it is really harsh. Putting someone in a tiny, tiny box like that, yeah, you might go, "Oh, well, that's funny," because I remember doing that as a kid. You did that for 5 minutes. Try going in there for 5 days. That is brutal psychological torture. And just the kind of coming in, the little mind games people play, it's brutal on that, but it also shows how people can get the effective info and how you can play those mind games. Eventually in this movie, they have a scene where they can't get the info, that they're not getting this guy to break, but they've been torturing him kind of for so long that they kind of go, why don't we just tell him that he told us? Because at this point his mind is so far gone that the next day they kind of have him all set up and they're like, oh, thank you for telling us all of that great information about the tower attack. You saved a lot of innocent lives. And it breaks him, kind of, even though now he's kind of recovered, but he can't remember everything that happened over the past couple days, to be more willing to talk because he assumes in his mind that he already talked because of the way you're treating him. It's a wonderful little move, and this is some of the real stuff they'll do. Is once you've been, kind of messed up in the mind, because I've been up for 3-4 days at a God, I'm trying to remember that time in Fort Jackson, how long we were up at. Oh, God. That was because of bureaucratic fuck-ups, too. That was horrible. But you start kind of lose track of time and losing kind of what happened over it. That was just the early stuff. If you keep somebody up for 5 days straight, and then let them go to sleep, and then have them wake up, they will hardly remember what the fuck happened. So that I can almost guarantee you they've tried that before and it worked. So I think it's interesting how they do that. Although I have heard that there's a lot of times they've also used other tactics to get people to talk, not just to torture. And I think maybe that should have been a little bit more addressed, especially as the movie progresses. They kind of show the changing political progression, because honestly, a good chunk of this movie is told through news clippings and real news clippings, not news clippings, but clips from Fox, CNN, and all that fun stuff. Whew. So they do show the progression and kind of the changing attitudes that's going on, not necessarily with the CIA people, but you get the sense that the outside world is starting to question what's going on in these black sites and such. So the movie starts off in the early Bush era, where people didn't really care about the shit that was going on there, and they could get away with some extreme stuff. And it kind of does show more of that changing, and you can see in the characters a little bit more uncertainty and kind of them going, oh, is shit gonna fall on us for what we did a couple years ago? That nervousness, and that of course adds another element of drama a bit, because we don't know how that's gonna fall eventually. Although again, eventually you kind of know that no one took a real big fall for that. Eventually they kind of just, I think even it's kind of known that they're just not gonna. No one's going to really get prosecuted in the U.S. for those. I mean, if Obama didn't do it, I can't see anyone else not doing it. But so that, I mean, again, there's another instance where sometimes if you know the history and you've been paying attention, you know certain things are not going to be done. Or, You're not going to see these individuals brought before a jury at any time to answer for their to torture stuff, because that hasn't happened. But in addition to that, there was I talked about it earlier. There was a scene with the bombing of a CIA meeting, and it's interesting what I picked up what they were talking about, and is the main character in this movie, which I'm assuming is probably actually a combination of many different people, little aspects, but it's Maya, played by Jessica Chastain, who who does a fine performance, but I'm guessing she's probably a combination of many different. But she's supposed to represent the kind of new Cold War, the new War on Terrorism era generation coming into the CIA, a new generation that perhaps gets it. And it does show kind of the new school versus the old school, where she has one of her other fellow CIA agents who's a little bit more senior because she's been around longer. The other female agent is much more used to Cold War, thinking only in money, thinking about the stuff that kind of worked in the Cold War, and then not getting it. And Maya kind of purposely counters, like, no, that's not going to work. Money, bribery doesn't work with these guys. And they have a bit of a mature conversation about it. There's, I guess, a little bit of contention, a little debate over this, a little fighting. Like, they both are kind of annoyed by the other, but at the same time, they bring up points. And the other character even acknowledge it. Like, Maya brings up these guys are fanatics, and then the other character goes, okay, that's true for some of them, but at least some people in the organization will be persuaded by money. And even Maya has to acknowledge there might be some people within there that can be bought off, but she kind of argues overall you can't expect this stuff to really work that effectively. And lo and behold, they get blown up because they get trapped into having someone that seems like they're going to be a good agent, and then the reason they're coming forward is for cash. As it turns out, it's just an excuse to get close to CIA agents to bomb them. Sorry. And of course, so that's done really well. I think they also kind of skipped somewhat some of the less cinematic. I think there was a lot of analysis that went into eventually figuring out who was connected to who, and unfortunately, that's not as cinematic as getting information from torturing. So obviously, that wasn't concentrated on as much. And that's just because of the medium. You can't. It's just really hard to show someone that's going through paperwork and such. I mean, they had the scenes where she's watching all these various interrogations. She's seeing the same name picked up, but it's monotonous to get through all that data. I mean, as anyone that's written like a long research paper can tell you, there's a lot of monotonous reading involved. You gotta read stuff all the way through, even if it's only a little bit of it is going to be useful to you. Sometimes, I mean, I remember when I was doing my thesis, I've read entire reports or entire academic articles, and there was not the title and the description looked promising, and after I read through the entire thing, it's like, well, I can't use anything in here. Oh well. On to the next one. So there's a lot of that I don't think was really showed up here. Now, the big one here, though, is we should talk about the actual raid on the compound. Actually, scratch that. Before that, I almost forgot I wouldn't talk about this first because it was the beginning of the movie, but the movie starts off very, very eerily in that it's just for like a minute, 2 minutes of just silence and hearing like phone conversations of 9/11. And I'm not sure if these are actual like phone conversations that were recorded and like they're part of the historical record for whatever reason they were recorded. That's got to be one of the creepy and eeriest openings. It's just a black screen and you hearing these phone calls and slowly getting the sense, including like somebody going, "It's it's okay." A plane hit Tower, World Trade Center Tower 1. We're in Tower 2. We're safe and stuff like that. Like, if those are actual, because I know there is plenty of recorded messages from 9/11. That's spooky. That's a spooky opening. Uh, so I just wanted to put that out. Anyway, back down to the official raid. They do a. I like how one of the things that really helped build up tension in this scene, which it's done really well, because when you think about it, it's not a traditional action movie scene. They kill what, 4 people? That's about it. It's not like a Expendables 2 where they're killing that many every 5 seconds. And by the way, the sound when they pull a trigger, it's loud, and it really gets you to go, oh, that kind of jump up a bit. So the good sound work here, especially when they do the explosions too. But when it comes to the actual raid, actually the funny thing is, if it wasn't known that a lot of, again, this is one of those. I'd be curious if we find out how much of this stuff was based on real life and how much they kind of added. Like, if this was just done in a movie and they had the helicopter crash, I'd be like, oh, come on. Oh, come on. Yeah, they have this whole thing, and then just when they get there, they happen to have a helicopter malfunction that causes the crash. Yeah, right. Well, here's one of those instances of us calling bullshit on Hollywood, and it turns out real life sometimes is like a Hollywood script. Where, if you don't remember, one of the helicopters they took out, the stealth helicopters, had a malfunction after they arrived and wound up crashing in one of the Osama bin Laden's backyard, basically. But the actual raid is another example where this film does not shy away from the dirty side of war, but at the same time doesn't overemphasize it, and really kind of attempts to stay very neutral. Which I guess is Catherine Bigelow's specialty, considering her Hurt Locker experience. Because she does not pull punches. She doesn't show it's like, oh, the SEALs are such great, fantastic guys. They're getting everything done perfectly. No, ooh, man, they kill people right in front of the kids, and they don't hesitate to show that. Like, they don't it's not painting them badly. It's just kind of painting them like that's the way it is, type of a deal. Like it's not. It doesn't emphasize and go, look, see what this war did. It caused people to get shot in front of children. It doesn't point the finger, but at the same time, it doesn't ignore that stuff either. And it doesn't try to at the same time compensate by going, oh, they shot that. Look, the SEALs feel so bad. No, they kind of don't. I mean, there's one guy that you can see he gets a little emotional after seeing all the shit that's happened there, and the one scene where there is a SEAL and he kind of tries to be all nice to the kid. At the same time, he's only kind of doing that because they're trying to get confirmation from one of the kids that they killed Osama bin Laden. Hell, in fact, in one scene, they had the famous where they shoot one of the Courier brothers that are there, and the wife kind of jumps on top of him to warn him, and they just, because he's not fully dead yet, they just kind of shoot through her to shoot him, kind of cold-bloodedly. And I get the whole scenario why you would do that, because he still has a gun in his hand, so you can't. She's now moved towards a firearm. You don't take that risk. And again, the other thing is they after the people are dead, they just go up and start putting more bullets in the body. Which again, makes sense. You don't want them kind of jumping up with that last little burst of adrenaline or fake being dead. You're going to make sure their ass is dead. So they put more rounds in them, especially when they eventually shoot Osama up there. It almost seems like everyone in the room decides to go up and put an extra round in the guy, which I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that's another thing they overheard from the SEALs. Like, oh yeah, after he was down, everyone kind of went up and put one round in him. Come on, who here wouldn't? Alright, maybe you personally wouldn't, but who here wouldn't believe the actual SEALs probably kind of did that? At least the guys in the room decided to all put a final coup de grace on that. I don't think there are many who would doubt that part. But there is surprisingly a large amount of tension with that scene. And one of the things that really helps is that there's no soundtrack. There's no musical accompaniment during that whole scene. There's a tension building kind of music as they're flying out, and they're giving like everyone's okay here. Maya's in the command post here. There's Washington. There's the SEALs are in there prepping. Getting their war face on, all that fun stuff. But then, it kind of as soon as they get to the actual compound itself, the soundtrack cuts off, and it's just like the sound. So that moment, because sometimes soundtracks can really ruin what's to be expected, and it's really hard in a movie where we kind of know what happens during this raid already. Most people are going to know they're going to find him in there, and there was no casualties on the U.S. side, I don't believe, announced from this. So it's very much it's very tricky then to add that, and the silence really does help with that. The raid scene is very well done. So that's about it to talk about that scene. The most interesting thing though is Jessica. Yes, the actress Jessica, but how Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bola, who wrote the screenplay, address with the character of Maya. She's that classic kind of determined person, and I guess they played with her. I'm not sure if this was more them playing with the character, or if this is more of this. These are how these guys were. The Saudi team, or which I believe the Saudi group was that the code name for the actual team. I'm trying to remember that, but oh yeah, by the way, they have they have like chapter titles in here, and some of them are kind of fun to see when they pop up. Like when she's talking with the SEALs when they're first getting briefed on the mission, they're like, you're doing all this to risk me, and she kind of just Maya kind of just goes, it's like, I really don't care. She kind of tells him I really don't care. I wanted to drop a bomb on this thing, but the higher ups were too nervous about this. So you're going to be the canaries, and if this turns out to not be the case, you can skither out, and nobody will be the wiser. So then later on, when it times for the actual kind of raid, it comes up with the chapter title, Canaries. But there's other stuff. It brings up, info. The title chapters work because there's a title chapter on human error. It kind of shows how they missed something purely because it was a bureaucratic oversight. They got information years and years ago, but it was right after 9/11, and so many countries in their generosity, dumped so much information on the CIA they didn't have time to properly analyze all the stuff. And so it kind of got filed away. And ironically, that kind of comes right after when they had the blow up. And then there's the whole thing about tradecraft when they're trying to figure out if Osama's here, and most of it is based on how well, they're doing all this effort to figure out this building if Osama's been on this internet, and they can't, and that it kind of becomes the evidence is that there's so much effort to block an agency like the CIA from finding out what's going on in this building, that it's gotta be him. So it's interesting when it comes to all that stuff. But her character, her persistence, it's tough to figure out when they're to get back on track. It's tough to figure out without knowing the actual individuals and maybe learning about their lives if this is how they were. But at the end, there's a very interesting scene where they kind of continually point this out. James Gandolfini, who plays the CIA director, there's a scene where he sits there and he talks with Maya in the cafeteria, and he kind of goes, other than Osama bin Laden, have you done anything else for us? And she kind of goes, no. And it kind of shows her obsession over this. And at the end, it ends with her kind of just she gets a plane, and they kind of point out, and they kind of mention this a few other times, that she really doesn't have any friends She doesn't really socialize that often. She's really obsessed with her work, and she gets on the plane after the raid, and the airman on there is going, "Oh, you must be really important. You know, you're the only person on the manifest. Where do you want to go?" And then she kind of sits down and she kind of starts kind of cry a little bit, and you kind of understand: is it a cry of relief or kind of a, the real question is, okay, and I think this is the director here, Bigelow, asking, okay, you've killed Bin Laden, now what do we do? You know, which other kind of actor, which is kind of brought up a little bit earlier. Okay, is Osama that important now? And it's more of a call to the audience, since we're now in the okay, we've gotten Osama bin Laden. What are we gonna do now? We've kind of long past that point of where we're just pure vengeance. We've now got to really figure out what we're doing. And ultimately, that's the question that the movie really ends on. And who knows, maybe over time that we'll get interpreted differently, because that's kind of one of the questions. Eventually that somehow gets answered because through history. You got to get answered in some way. But the real question is for us now is like, okay, what do we do? Did we really kind of over obsess on this? Was all the stuff we just did worth it just to kill this guy? Or do we really realize we just killed the guy now? We still got a whole lot of other mess to do. So it's very interesting, to say the least, how that ends. Again, highly recommend the film. Check it out. Well worth it. I'm trying to think now if there is any trailers that I saw that. Oh, there was one trailer I saw. Now I forgot what the title was. God damn it. I did see one trailer that looked good. And now I've completely forgotten what it is. Oh well. Let's see. I got the Oblivion trailer again. A lot of smaller films on this one. Broken City, yeah, it looks alright. Broken City looks alright. Still trying to remember what their trailer was. I really should bring a notepad when I go to a movie, just write down stuff like this. But yeah, in a lot of ways, this actually is a good film to watch in conjunction with Argo. It's a very good complementary film. Both because they both come out around the same time, and they both deal with the CIA in the Middle East. Likewise, yeah, of course this would go good with The Hurt Locker, considering it's from the same director. It's nice to see that we actually have a female director that's sort of now staking her claim as a war film director. I would not be surprised if we see another film from her in the future that deals with another military scenario. It's looking over her. She's done K-19 The Widowmaker, Hurt Locker. She did Point Break. Not really military, but she's got some action credentials. Catherine Bigelow can shoot she can do tension quite well. Tension and action. I haven't seen Strange Days, but I liked K-19. She's an actor. She's a director who is got some authenticity, or who's a good war film director. I want to see her do some other stuff. It seems she's really staked her claim though in the modern war on terrorism. I guarantee you we're going to see in the future another film on the war on terror at some point. In one of its aspects, perhaps something in Libya. Perhaps she'll go back to the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan in some aspects. But she's got an eye on that. Let's see. As for everyone else in the cast, I like the surprise cameo by John Barrowman. He kind of popped up all of a sudden, Captain Jack from Doctor Who. I was like, kind of turned the corner. I'm like, wait a minute, that's Captain Jack there. What's he doing? Is he gonna try to make out with James Gandolfini? You have to know his character from Doctor Who to get that one. James Gandolfini, of course, popping up. Oh God, what's his name from Office Space? Yep, there he is. Kyle Chandler popping up in there. So plenty of recognizable names. Even there's a couple other guys that popped up in there. It's just like, oh, it's that guy. But this should be a career booster for all of them. I think a lot of people are going to want to see this movie, but I think a lot of let's say the less well informed, I just want to see. Yeah, I want to see him go and shoot up Osama bin Laden. It's a serious film. It's going to take its time, and again, it's an intelligent film, and it's for an intelligent audience, and well informed audience. So I expect there to be a lot of bitching about this film too. On to site news before I close it out. Actually, let me. So in conclusion, go see this movie. I highly recommend it. You might want to brief yourself up again a little bit on Al Qaeda over the past couple of years. Some of the terrorist attacks they've committed. They've certainly shown plenty of some of the smaller terrorist attacks that were committed over the years. At the bus bombing in London, the attacks on the Khobar Towers, the attack on the Marriott in Pakistan, such like these, which I do recall all being actual terrorist incidents. So they're all shown here in this movie. So it is important to kind of refresh yourself on a lot of these stuff, and even on the torture issue and stuff. If you refresh yourself a little bit on this before, it's going to be it'll be a much better movie going experience. So definitely worth checking out. And it's a good start for the year. It's the first 2013 movie I've seen, although it's actually considered a 2012 movie because it got a special early release in 2012. I don't know. I consider this a 2013 movie. But yeah. So site news. I got a little bit of a delay on the my top movies of the years. I recorded it, and this is just kind of, it's every time I kind of go on to start editing it, which is kind of a little bit more of a pain, even though it's really not an excuse because it's such a simple real editing job. But it seems like every time I decide, okay, I'm going to sit down for that hour to do the editing, which is really just plopping in different screenshots at different points in the movie. It's really not an excuse. I should have had it done. It seems like somebody tries to shoots me a message on Steam and like, hey, you want to play Dungeon Defenders? I'm like, okay, I'll play it for like an hour. 2 hours later, and I would have done it today, but I'm doing this video. But hopefully that'll be up tomorrow. I'm hoping at some time. Hopefully, I might jump on tomorrow morning and just get that edited real fast. I just gotta make a few images on the computer. It should be all set. Not sure what the next movie I'm gonna see is, but I would expect we'll probably have something next week. This year looks pretty good thus far with movies, so. And we got off to a good start. So, I think I've talked more than enough. If you've listened this long, congratulations. You are listening to me ramble on for 43 minutes. Signing off.